Hi guys and welcome to the Language Lad YouTube channel. My name's Johnny and in today's video we're going to be talking all about the difference between voiced and unvoiced sounds. So, what do we mean by a voiced sound and what do we mean by an unvoiced sound? Well, a voiced sound is put simply a sound which involves the vibrating of the vocal cords, whereas an unvoiced sound does not. This means essentially that we have a bunch of sounds that we are making all of the time and that I've made many of in this video so far, which utilize our vocal cords, and a bunch of sounds which do not. And intriguingly and fascinatingly, there are actually a whole bunch of pairs of these sounds where, and if you've never knew this before, this will blow your mind, because this blew my mind completely when I first found this out a few years ago, after getting into all this sort of language learning and linguistic stuff, that there are a bunch of sounds where there are a pair of sounds where one of the sounds is a voiced sound and one of the sounds is a unvoiced and unvoiced sound. And actually the mouth position of these two things is identical, and it's just simply whether or not you are utilizing your vocal cords when you're making that sound. This is insane to my mind, but absolutely incredible and genuinely fascinating, because one of the things you'll learn as you start learning other languages is that not every language and not all people understand and hear more than understand the difference between voiced and unvoiced sounds, but that if you have those voiced and unvoiced sounds within your language, then you will make allowances for the fact and realize that you're doing this, even if you haven't got a clue as to why or how on a conscious basis, as I will explain later in the video. So we're going to talk about some of the pairs of these sounds, because I think this is a fascinating thing to illustrate this point. So we're going to start with a pair of sounds, which is an unvoiced sound, which is a, and the voiced version of that, which is v, v, v. So the does not utilize your vocal cords, whereas v does. So the way you can tell that is either you can put your finger in here and see whether or not it's vibrating as you're making that sound. So if you go, it won't, but if you go, it does vibrate. The other way is you can put a little piece of paper or even your hand in front of your mouth, and if you do in a you don't feel any air, with you do feel a bit there. Okay, so that's how you can tell this difference. Now, this is a really cool example based on what I was saying a few minutes ago, because back in the days of Old English, actually Old English didn't distinguish between the v and the f sounds. So didn't make any difference to them, which is why, fascinatingly, we have a bunch of plurals to words, for example, where the word ends in an F, where the plural we would use the VES version. So elf and elves. Because to the Old English ear, that was the same sound, and this is what I mean. So once in modern English, you can't hear, you would definitely hear the difference between the f and the v, but to Old English they were interchangeable. It didn't make any difference to them. They weren't consciously aware of that as a different sound. It was just all like a sound to them that they would associate with being the same, fundamentally the same sound, which is so cool in my opinion. But obviously nowadays we would hear the difference really easy between, for example, the word fast and the word vast. So fast, fast. The sound at the front of there, it makes exactly the same. It's exactly the same movement in your mouth, but with a f, it's unvoiced, not using these, and a v, it is. So fast, vast. Very cool. Next one is this is a really cool one as well. I'm going to say really cool loads of times because I find this absolutely fascinating. This is the difference between a p and a b, b, b. So b, 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 p, p, unvoiced, b, 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 voiced. So the difference between a P and a B. You certainly wouldn't want to eat a B. You might want to eat a P, depending on your personal tastes. Now, next we have s and z. So so in other words, S and Z. Now, this is really interesting because I'm going to use an example here which has a different spelling at the end of the word, just to show the confusions of English spelling systems, which we're going to do lots of videos on in the future. So if you like what you're seeing today, bear in mind that this is one of many, many videos on this sort of topic that is going to be coming out in the next few months and years. So yeah, we will have a bunch of stuff on this. For example, this word ending here, which the first one I'm going to do is sink, as in put that down the sink. And the second one is zinc. Zinc. Okay, so we have the same ending of those two words, but this is the difference at the start. And the endings are spelled with a K for sink and a C for zinc. Interesting. We'll find out why in future videos. Next, we have the and so T and D. So tent and dent. Very nice, yes. Next, I find this a really fascinating one, is sh, 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 and j, j, j. So, sh, sh, sh. Literally our definition of saying sh. Obviously, that's going to be an unvoiced sound. If you went sh, you'd be like, you're making quite a lot of noise there, mate. So this is where you go sh, unvoiced, sh, voiced. Now, we don't start any words, so I don't think, certainly in my southern dialect, well, I don't know if you call it, depends how you define a dialect. So I guess many people watching out there will have already formed their own views on my accent. It's probably closest described as estuary English with a few twangs of West Country, maybe, possibly, but generally a more sort of generic-y southeasty accent. Certainly not received pronunciation in some of the things that I say, that's for sure. But I don't think in the southern general version of English we start any words with but the French do all the time. So, for example, jour, as in day in French, that starts with this sound, which is just the voiced version of sh. So sure and jour would be an interesting comparison here. The best place to find it in an English word, though, is in the middle of words like leisure, pleasure, treasure. Okay, and also if you're struggling to pronounce that French jour, then don't try to go jaw like a lot of English people do, because it's not, even though it's written with a J, they are going to be wanting you to sound, they're going to be hearing the sound rather than wanting you to sound what they probably do want you to say, je rather than jaw, because that's not a French pronunciation. But obviously this is the beauty of accents. So therefore we've got sh and j. So also you could look at that as a pair that you could use for that would be the English word shack, as in they live in an absolute shack, or the French name Jacques. So those start of those two words is actually the same. So shack and Jacques is just a difference between voiced, unvoiced, and voiced. Interesting. Next we have a ch, 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 and a j, j, j. So ch and j, ch and j, which means if you've got some gin on your chin, that is quite simply voiced and unvoiced. Chin, ch, 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 ch. Chin, unvoiced, ch, j, 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 j. Gin, voiced. Okay. Next, we have got a really interesting one, because this links into something that I was mentioning earlier about people can subconsciously understand this difference if they've ever experienced this within their own language. And this is so cool. So we've got the well, that's the voice. So we've got as the unvoiced, and so as the unvoiced we got, and the voice we got. So you can see I struggle a little bit with this one, because I don't tend to use it that much. I sometimes do, I sometimes don't, as one of my best mates never fails to point out in quite inconsistent and hilarious manners, whether or not I use this or not. I'll go for something known as TH fronting, which is where you don't bother to say the TH, you just change it into an F. So this is super fascinating. So we've got the voiced version of this sound, that in this. Okay, and we've got the unvoiced, which is in words like thin. Now in Old English, this voiced version, should I say, but it's written with a TH, which is why I keep sort of getting it slightly wrong. The TH there in the voice was called thorn, whereas the was called earth. Okay, now this is super interesting, because actually the letter thorn if you've never seen it, it's got a straight line down and then a sort of little semicircle off it attached to it. This is the origin of the idea of something being ye olde. It never was ye olde. It's just that the thorn sound that was the made it look similar to the Y. So people translated it as well, that must be a Y, but it wasn't. It was always the old. Okay, so it's really interesting that. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this is that this subconscious difference that I was talking about. So if you look at a lot of Southern English accents, particularly the estuary English accent, a London accent, stereotypically for this as well, you will find that very few people who have a very strong Southern Eastern estuary or London accent will say for the unvoiced. Okay, so if they will say things like, I think, not I think, I think, not I think he's thin, rather than I think he's thin. Okay. But they will also subconsciously realise that there is this difference between this F and this V, this voiced and this unvoiced sound, because they won't say bruv with a F at the end. They'll say something like bruv or my brother, rather than bruv or my brother. Now, the amount of people who consciously know that there is this difference between the voicing and the unvoicing going on when they're making two versions of v and th, I would imagine is very, very low. I certainly didn't have a clue about any of this until the last few years of getting really into linguistics, etc. But we notice this because as English speakers, we've been exposed to this voiced and unvoiced, and our brains subconsciously know that we would want to say that it would be so it's a f, whereas it's brother, so it'd be a v. Okay, so we say I think he's my brother, rather than I think he's my brother. Fascinating, huh? So we know it on a subconscious basis, even if we do not know it on a conscious basis. Very cool. And then finally, this is another little intriguing one, which I'm going to make a video on in its own right, is this W. There's a W one as well of these pairs, which is the difference between w, 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 which is voiced, w, 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 and which is unvoiced, which means that you've got this difference that runs along the lines of something like, and this is fascinating, witch for a witch, as in a person who flies on a broomstick, and which is which road should we take? Which road should we take? Now, you notice the majority of English people these days, and I do mean English in this context, do not make a distinction between this. They'd say which is taking which road. However, only 60, 70, 80 years ago, the majority of people in England would have said which is taking which road. My gran, for example, she would constantly correct me when I was a kid over this one, say it's not what, it's what. Now, a lot of Scottish accents and a lot of American accents still, not that many actually in America, but still a numerous number, but a lot of Scottish accents and some other dialects within the United Kingdom also maintain this distinction. So therefore, there is this little pairing, whereas in modern Southern English, like my accent, for example, there's no distinction at all between which and which. But it did mean that back in the day there was, and also in, as I say, in Scotland and in many other English dialects around the world, there is still that distinction. So they would talk about there being a difference between let's get this right, the country Wales and the animal the whale, and that is simply a difference between the voiced whales and the unvoiced whales. Whales. Very nice, yes. Now, you may have guessed, and I'm sure there will be some people out there, if they've bothered to watch this entire video, that I'm not an absolute expert in the field of linguistics. I'm just super enthusiastic and keen about all this stuff and love talking about it. So that's why I've decided to make this video today and all the future videos on this channel. I hope you've enjoyed that, and if there are any corrections you would like to make in the comments down below to my exact explanations and my exact soundings, if you are somebody who is that way inclined, please feel free to. I would love to read them. I'll be fascinated because I'm always trying to learn more and get these as right as possible. But bear in mind, I'm not a professional in the field of linguistics, just an extremely passionate and interested amateur doing my absolute best to try to convey the passion for this awesome and fascinating subject to the rest of the world. Now, that is all for today. Have a lovely day. And if you like what you've seen, please subscribe for future videos. Thanks very much. Bye for now.